Well, we're looking at Darwin in view of the fact that we've looked at the worldwide flood and evolutionism and uniformitarianism, and everything seems to point back to Darwin and before him. Not only was Darwin's contribution primarily in philosophy, it wasn't very scientific. It was a philosophy bent on a specific mission to show that creation is unscientific. The most extensive research into Darwin's religious attitudes and motivations has been done by historian Neal C. Gillespie, Georgia State University. He begins his book with this comment: "On reading The Origin of Species, I, like many others, became curious about why Darwin spent so much time about attacking the idea of divine creation. Why not just go into a scientific examination without any preconceived notion and not try to attack a particular idea that might explain it or might not?" Neal C. Gillespie, Charles Darwin and the Problem of Creation. Gillespie goes on to demonstrate that Darwin's purpose was not just to establish the concept of evolution. Darwin was wise enough not to stop there. Darwin went for the jugular vein. Darwin's master accomplishment was to convince the scientific world that creation, God, creator, was unscientific, to believe in supernatural causation. His purpose was to ungod the universe. Darwin was a positivist, whatever that is. This is the philosophy, that the only true knowledge is scientific knowledge. No other type of knowledge is legitimate. Obviously, to accept that premise means to reject any form of divine revelation. The only problem with that is most people act like they're their own divine revelation. They don't provide proof. The evolutionists provide divine revelation. Yeah. Punctuated equilibria. Where did you get that? That's how the origin of species, one species evolves into another, but we have no proof of that. But we'll just say that does. That's divine revelation. It's certainly not scientific. Darwin accomplished one of the greatest feats of salesmanship in the history of the world. He convinced scientists that it was unscientific to deal with God or creation in any way. To be scientific, they must study the world as if God did not exist. I'll grant you one thing. Science on a basic level, it has to be observable, repeatable, and falsifiable. Now, we can observe things in a scientific manner, like the human body, unbelievably complex. And we take the science of Isaac Newton. He says there doesn't seem to be anything but devolvement, not evolving. So things are devolving because we just look at the fossil record, study history, and we find things aren't the way they used to be. More species, larger ones, people live longer, animals live longer. Apparently the Earth, evidence shows, was in a far greater state of superiority to the way it exists today. We have huge weather problems, extremes of temperature and weather, all kinds of catastrophic events now occurring, one right after the other. Catastrophic changes. Somehow we go all the way back before the worldwide flood, if you will, and things were very consistent. And we look in the uniformitarian idea of things were always the way they were, but there's just no evidence to that effect. But when things were great, evidently we saw some evidence of a perfect nuclear reactor underneath the Earth. We have all the elements there, but because of all kinds of catastrophic activity, including volcanoes, earthquakes, and worldwide floods, lots of rain, those things changed dramatically and quickly. So to be scientific, they must study the world as if God did not exist. Well, you don't have to study it either way, whether he exists or not. Just observe and report. You can observe repeatedly certain things in a short span of your lifetime, or history books of good scientific origin, and see what the direction is. And we don't see anything happening over a long period of time. We see things happening catastrophically. There's no evidence that the Grand Canyon gradually, uniformly, billions of years got that deep. Because when a lot of water comes down the pike, it goes to bedrock. Then it spreads out. That's exactly what we see in the Grand Canyon. And when we find out at the top of the canyon, older rock strata than the bottom, according to radiometric dating. That doesn't make any sense unless a catastrophic thing happened. That would be scientific. Ernest Mayr recognized the true significance of what is called the Darwinian Revolution. The Darwinian Revolution was not merely the replacement of one scientific theory by another. Theory means observable, reportable, falsifiable. It's a model, and it's not scientific, as had been the scientific revolutions in the physical sciences, but rather the replacement of a worldview in which the supernatural was accepted as a normal and relevant explanatory principle by a new world in which there was no room for supernatural forces. Problem is, there are a lot of things that in the scientific world that we can't explain, and they end up explaining them as if they're mystical and beyond our comprehension. Wouldn't that be somewhat supernatural? In all of this, the Big Bang Theory, supernatural, right? It is important to realize that Darwin was not an atheist. He did not exterminate God. He just evicted God from the universe which God had created. All that God was allowed to do was to create the natural laws at the beginning. From then on, nature was on its own. With God out of the picture, evolution fell into place rather easily, since evolution seemed to be the only viable alternative to special creation. Allow me to say it again. The establishment of evolution was only a secondary accomplishment of Darwin's. His major accomplishment was to ungod the universe. With that accomplished, evolution became unnatural. The only problem is their explanations weren't natural. They had to come up with all kinds of fiction to support their point of view. So we are now getting down to basics. The real issue in the creation-evolution debate is not the existence of God. The real issue is the nature of God. Of course, I don't like using the word God because there's so many people would give him another name, like a force of some kind, like the Big Bang Theory or the God particle, but not the God of the Bible. The real issue is the nature of God. To think of evolution as basically atheistic is to misunderstand the uniqueness of evolution. Evolution was not designed as a general attack against theism. It was designed as a specific attack against the God of the Bible, and the God of the Bible is clearly revealed through the doctrine of creation. Obviously, if a person is an atheist, it would be normal for him to also be an evolutionist. But evolution is as comfortable with theism as it is with atheism. An evolutionist is perfectly free to choose any God he wishes, as long as it is not the God of the Bible. The gods allowed by evolution are private, subjective, and artificial. They bother no one and make no absolute ethical demands. However, the God of the Bible is the creator, the sustainer, should capitalize, savior, and judge. All are responsible to him. He has an agenda that conflicts with that of sinful humans. For man to be created in the image of man is very comfortable. Of course, the problem with that is man has no capacity to create anything beyond his own complexity. He can use his own capacities. Some humans are more creative than others and more intelligent than others, but they can't go beyond their own capacity, their own complexity. Evolution was originally designed as a specific attack against the God of the Bible, and it remains so to this day. While Christian theistic evolutionists seem blind to this fact, the secular world sees it very clearly. Darwin's associate, Thomas Huxley, saw it clearly over 100 years ago when he wrote, "The doctrine of evolution, therefore, does not even come into contact with theism. Considered as a philosophical doctrine, that with which it does collide, and with which it is absolutely inconsistent, is the conception of creation which theological speculators have based upon the history narrated in the opening of the book of Genesis." Thomas Huxley, that's his work on the reception of the origin of species, the life and letters of Charles Darwin and Francis Darwin. Things have not changed. Darwin is very much alive in that sense. Sir William Patton, University of Oxford, wrote in 1986, "Perhaps it is not so much the possible existence in human awareness of some higher being that can most worry a scientist, but the idea of that being interfering with the natural course of events with natural law." Of course, natural law, what does that mean? Something you made up, and then you redefine it as you go, and you find out it contradicts itself wherever you view things. So it's not a law, and it's not natural. A law is supposed to be consistent. William Patton is the reductionist beyond belief. In Nature magazine, he wrote an article on that. Evolutionists believe that evolution embraces the entire history of the universe. If Huxley's God doesn't even come into contact with evolution, the history of the universe, it is obvious that this absentee God is not the God of the Bible. Patton's higher being is forbidden to interfere with natural law. Thus, natural law is really Patton's God, for it is the highest power. See, they contradict themselves. Any similarity between Patton's natural law and New Age pantheism's "the force to be with you" is not accidental. The New Age gods are the natural fruit of evolutionary theory. The present spiritual battle in our society is not between theism and atheism. It is between the God of the Bible and the gods of evolution and pantheism. Now we have John D. Morris. Makes the following statement in an article in the Impact periodical: "Christianity and evolution cannot both be true. Evolution is, in its very essence, an atheistic explanation of the world around us." You can name things like gods and that kind of thing, but actually the conclusions of atheism, of evolution, are the superior to the gods that they claim are involved with it, because the gods that they claim are gods can't interfere with their theories of evolution, their model. Consider the following oft-repeated quote from Sir Julian Huxley, who until his recent death was perhaps the world's leading spokesman for evolution. Darwin pointed out that no supernatural designer was needed, since natural selection could account for any now known form of life. Of course, there's so many fallacies in that, it's ridiculous. There was no room for supernatural agency in its evolution. We can dismiss entirely all ideas of a supernatural overriding mind being responsible for the evolutionary process. That's the God. Their conclusions. So mankind, who's not superior to his creation, other than that he is the superior being, but he can't do anything about changing how creation occurs or has occurred. So he makes himself his own conclusions of the God. You can claim all kinds of gods that you want, But the problem with the conclusions of